Second aspect we want to cover is the rambling nature of the mind. Every person's mind has this tendency to ramble into the past, ramble into the future. All right, the example we often give is you're reading a text, something you have to study or learn for your work or for your degree. It's boring. It's not something that you particularly like. You start reading, you get to the bottom of the page, and what do you suddenly realize? I have no idea what I just read. So you've got to go back again. So it wastes your time, it wastes your energy. It also causes frustration, fatigue. Use an analogy at the physical level. If you're standing in the middle of a field and then you run to that side and you run back and then run to that side and run back, do that all day. You're going to be physically exhausted. This is what's happening at the psychological level. Where should your mind be? Right here. Where does it go? To what just happened 5 minutes ago, to what may happen next week, to what happened 10 years ago, to the meeting I'm having in 5 hours' time. It keeps on going to the past and the future. So what do we have to do? We have to drag it back into the present. So we've dissipated a whole lot of our mental energies on things that are unproductive. In the meantime, we've missed what's going on here. So if you are on the other end of, say, a Federer's tennis serve, your attention should not be on winning the Wimbledon championship. It should not be on the last time I got a serve from this guy. Where should your attention be? On that little yellow ball that's traveling at 90 miles an hour and nowhere else. Every action that we perform demands our attention. To the extent that our attention is not in the present moment, to that extent the action is impoverished. The quality of the action is reduced. So we're less effective in our actions, we're less productive in terms of the time and energy spent. We become frustrated because we don't have control of our own minds. We also get fatigued. The mind is running constantly. It's running out all of its energies. So at the end of the day, we're tired. End of the week, we need a weekend. End of the year, we need a 2-week holiday. It's the worries and anxieties of the mind, this rambling, that tires us. And of course the mind is running constantly, so what happens when we get to bed at night? We're tired, we're fatigued, but the mind has developed this momentum of running past and futures, so it keeps running. And so we're fatigued, we're tired, and we can't sleep. Good definition of hell. Tired and can't get to sleep. This is what happens when the mind remains ungoverned. So one of the analogies that we often use to discuss this relationship between mind and intellect is the water and the banks of a river. So if you have water flowing down a river and there's a sudden inundation, there's a huge amount of water coming through that riverbed. If the banks of the river are weak and shallow, then the water breaches the banks, overflows, inundates the towns and destroys homes and houses. If the banks of that river are strong and deep, then you can send 10 times that amount through and it gets channeled beautifully, correctly, and you can use that. You can generate electricity for the benefit of the community. So too with your emotions. The emotions, the mind runs through. If the banks of our river, as it were, are weak, then the emotions, the mind overflows. And it goes all the way over there to the past, all the way over there to the future. That resource we're not using here in the present. So the banks of the river is the intellect. To the extent that the intellect is developed, it, as it were, cuts a trench and tells the mind where to go, and the mind follows. So often when we talk about guidance of the mind, we think about grabbing the mind and wrestling the beast down to the ground and getting it to do what we want. It's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily a healthy way to guide the mind. The way to guide the mind is to engage with the intellect, to question. The moment you start asking questions and the moment you fix your attention on a goal that you think is worthwhile achieving, this is controlling the mind. You don't necessarily have to wrestle with the thing which is moving backwards and forwards. Place the attention somewhere else. The mind naturally starts to drift towards that. This is concentration. So in the text, he defines concentration as the art of the intellect, holding the mind on the present action without allowing it to slip into the past or future. Again, great advice, easier said than done. So from a long-term perspective, this requires the development of the intellect, the thinking capacity. So this is not something that happens overnight. You can't just expect the intellect to all of a sudden be developed. If you want to develop your physical body from being 100 pounds overweight and poor cardiovascular health, it's going to take a number of weeks or months to get there. So too, if the intellect is relatively weak, to get it to a position where it is strong enough to hold your mind takes time. It takes daily reflection, daily questioning. The basic function of the intellect is to think, is to question. If you want to strengthen the intellect, use it for that purpose. The basic function of your muscles is to contract and cause movement through the joint. So if you want to build your bicep, what do? Use it for the purpose for which it was intended, against weight, against resistance. So too, if you want to build the strength of the intellect, consider it like a muscle. Use it against resistance. So we take a text which has these sorts of philosophical principles that we're discussing, question them. What is being said? And we can go into a whole another hour on the process of questioning, reflecting and studying, so I won't go too much into it here. But by doing this process, we're gradually developing a strength of the intellect, and then it naturally starts to function. Okay, so put it this way. If your liver is beautiful and healthy, you don't have to do anything to get it to work. It just does what it does. If it's diseased or compromised, then it won't be able to work. Go to the doctor, get rid of the ill health, and it functions beautifully and you don't even notice it. In a similar way with the intellect, when it is strengthened to a certain point, it just naturally functions without you having to do anything about it. A simple example, let's say I knock my drink over and it spreads everywhere. You think it's funny. You've got this little impulse to laugh. But it's easy for you to just tap it down. I'm not going to laugh here. Why is it easy for you to do? Because you have a clear understanding of what's appropriate and what's not. You don't have to try. Your intellect has reached a level, at least, where it can manage that situation on its own. You don't have to put in any effort to guide or govern the mind because it's already reached a certain level of maturity. There are some things where you have to put some self-talk or some self-lecturing or some reflection or whatever it happens to be to move yourself to a place where you're doing what you know is the right thing. And there are some circumstances or relationships where we're completely helpless. Where if the person does something wrong or the person does something bad, no amount of self-talk is going to help me out of my frustration. So as the intellect develops, what's happening is that these three areas are changing in ratio. The ones where we're completely helpless diminish. The ones where we need to put effort into talk, they also diminish. Greater and greater is the proportion where the intellect just handles things on its own. In a sense, we've delegated the job to the intellect and we can just get on with what we're doing. Yeah.
I know certain people that implement these concepts but have no idea about intellect and the mind. And so what I'm thinking is so our children, if they see us and we continue to grow our intellect, and they see our patterns of behavior, by being around that, in them mimicking how we act, does that somehow raise their level of intellect as well, before us even as a parent even mentioning?
You wouldn't say it raises their level of intellect in the sense that it doesn't enhance their existing capacity to think and reason without bias. This is one of the fundamental definitions of intellect, the capacity to think and reason without bias. What's happening when you do that is the child is passively adopting certain positive values, right? I mean, look at the research. If you smoke, likelihood is increased that your children will smoke. Not that they're thinking it's good or anything else, just that they passively adopt your values by being around you. So too, if you exercise these principles as we're discussing, yes, your lifestyle will be passively adopted by the kids to a certain degree. I mean, if they see you getting up an hour earlier every morning and studying a book, if you do that every day and don't talk about it, that's the other important thing, they will naturally start to passively adopt that behaviour. Now, they may not get up and study, but they will recognise it as a thing that is worthwhile doing or whatever. That helps to create an environment in them where their efforts in developing their intellect will be enhanced. So their own questioning, their constant questioning of things.
So they could essentially or potentially start from a higher baseline than as a parent. If you were developing your intellect and you start here, and your children see those patterns, behaviors, that becomes their baseline, or could become. That could become
yeah. You know, part of what's developing your intellect as a parent is your continued questioning, and so that's something you'll always exhibit. And so when your kids see you questioning everything, then they will naturally start to question everything. And so that will help to develop their intellect in life. But it's not that your values have enhanced their intellect. Your values have given them an environment where intellectual development is going to be most effective, and where you are showing them that it is a worthwhile thing to pursue and how it is done. So yeah, it's extremely important in terms of guiding children that you do the thing yourself that you would want them to do, of course. So if you want your children to have a developed intellect, you must work on developing your intellect. You can't ask your children to function in a way which is rational, but you yourself are not doing anything to enhance your intellect. So the idea of developing the intellect over time then, we want something that is again a little bit more short term to help us offset this rambling of the mind. This again comes back to that habit that we're developing. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? How does this relate to my goals? What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking it? Okay, so when it comes to food, this is easy. We read the back of the ingredients. What's the fat, protein, carbohydrate content, sugars, additives and colours and so on and so forth. We look at if it doesn't conform to what I think is healthy food, I reject it. You are what you eat. Okay, so one of the fundamental principles that underlies the practice of self-development is, as you think, so you become. Put it this way, we gave the example earlier on of the Twin Towers attacks and one person celebrating, another person mourning. We established, or we posited the difference being the difference in their internal personalities. What makes up the internal personality? What makes me today what I am today? What makes you what you are? It's the thoughts, the feelings, and the intentions that we have entertained from this point as far backwards as you wish to conceive. What am I doing and why am I doing it? The answer to the question, why am I doing it, is because I have a value for it. That's the generic answer which is correct for every action you have ever performed. So when we ask this question, what am I thinking? The next question is, well, is this junk thought or is this healthy thought? If it's a junk thought, then we should treat it the same way we would treat junk food. No, thank you. What is the quality of this thought? Where's it going? Where's it leading me? What am I doing right now? Why am I doing it? Once again, when we connect ourselves to the goals and ideals that we have set for ourselves, we are more likely to stay on task, as long as those goals and ideals have been properly set. Now, I won't go into this here. We did this in, I think it was the 4th class. We touched on ideal setting. So if you want a refresher, I advise you go and watch that class. But what allows the flow of our attention to stay on task is, one of the things, is when we are convinced this is something that is worthwhile doing. Is when we are enthusiastic towards it. We have a conviction from our intellect which says this is something that is worthwhile doing, and at the same time there is an appreciation at the level of the mind towards the same activity. So when your intellect and your mind are convinced that this is a worthwhile thing to do, then the attention is much more likely to stay on task. If you've ever been in a meeting, you thought, why are we meeting again? Or a pre-meeting meeting, or a pre-meeting, or a post-meeting meeting. You'll sit through those things and just wait for it to be over. But if it's a meeting to determine whether or not your project is going to get its full funding, there your attention, you can't think about anything else. There your attention is totally on the meeting because you know it's worthwhile, my attention has to be here. So it is not just for specific environments, but all the way throughout our day. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? How does this connect to my goals? Do I need to be thinking about this? If the answer is yes, then think about it. By and large, the majority of the thought flows that enter into our awareness are not initiated consciously by us. They just appear in consciousness. Again, there's no problem with that. You can't blame yourself for the thought that arises. But you can blame yourself for continuing a thought flow that does not serve our well-being, or that has got nothing to do with what's going on here and now, the action that I am choosing. So the idea is that we need to develop this capacity of clipping the thought flow and bringing it back to the present moment. Yeah.
Can you talk about just kind of shifting gears and environments? The thing that comes to my mind is, going from work to home, changing gears and just trying to be present in that moment, right?
Yeah.
An analytical person, you go home, you're thinking about, right, projects and work. But I want to be like there present with my kids, right?
Yeah, it's a great example. So yeah, it's a really good question because as you say, you're at work, you're doing all your analysis, you're thinking about a project and trying to get it completed, leave work, go home, and the thinking is still analytical about the work project. This is not actually an example of someone who's analytical. This is an example of someone who is emotional. The mind is flowing back to the workplace, and as a consequence, you are taken there, and so that's where you do your analysis. Because as you pointed out, I want to be here with the family. It's the mind running out of control. So the idea of a person is, I'm very analytical, that's why I continue to think about my work when I get home. Analytical is the wrong word. I'm very emotional. And that's why my emotions keep going back to my workplace. And what happens at work, I've got to think about everything that goes on there. So the question of how to bring yourself into the present moment there, it's really, the answer is what we just described. Over the long term, develop the capacity to bring your attention where it needs to be. So that means in the same way that if you want to be physically strong enough to play sports with your kids, you have to exercise every day. If you want to be emotionally present with your kids, you have to exercise your intellect every day. At the physical level, we've got no problems committing ourselves to that. I'm giving up smoking so I can be with my family for the next 50 years. I'm giving up excess red meat, I'm giving up excess alcohol so I can be physically healthy, and no problem. Disciplines I'll put in at that level. Same discipline we need to put in at the intellectual level to question. What we're talking about the questioning there is the development of the intellect so that when you leave your work, your intellect already knows, okay, I've left work, I'm now going to home, so all my work stuff I don't have to think about anymore. So you need to develop the intellect to get to that strength so that when you leave work, your intellect recognizes, I have just left work. You could even do that specifically to yourself. For the last 15 minutes of your workday, repeat to yourself what you're doing. What are you doing? I'm logging off my emails. I'm packing up my desk. I'm putting my notes for tomorrow. I'm preparing this. I'm getting in the car. I'm driving home. I'm leaving work. Tell yourself what you are doing so you become hyper aware, I'm leaving work. When you get home, what am I doing? I'm driving to the driveway. I'm opening the front door. I'm walking into my home. So you become hyper aware that I'm in the house now. So you're using the intellect in that sense by re-establishing constantly where you are in the present moment. The other thing you can do is just be kind to yourself in terms of not leaving things undone before you go. So that requires planning. Again, that's part of the ideal setting that we covered. But knowing those things that are likely to hang around with you. I know that I've got this project ABC, and I know it's going to bug me because it's going on. All right, first thing I do when I get to work that day, where do I need to leave this particular project today so that I don't have to think about it when I leave? What is going to be an okay place for me to say, now I don't have to keep thinking about it? Set that as a goal for the day, finish it, and then go. And again, as you say, develop the habit. What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about it? As every time that thought comes to you, keep asking it in the mornings, in the evenings, throughout the day. What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about it? And use reminders if you need to. You know, I think I just developed an app. You set every 20 minutes, an app gives a notification on your phone. What are you thinking about? Okay, hopefully over a period of a few months you can delete the app because you won't need it anymore. You'll develop the habit of saying, what are you thinking about? Where is your mind? The more we ask ourselves that question, the more we are brought into stark relief that, well, I'm here, but my mind is there. And so we can start to bring this habit of bringing the mind back into the present moment. So what am I thinking about? And also importantly, what am I doing? I am doing dad stuff. You don't have to give it a specific definition, but just call it dad stuff or home stuff. Good, I'm doing that, be there. So this is really the essence of it, is finding a thought that you can hold on to. The ideal, something you can hold on to. What am I doing right now? Stay with that. You know, if the punishment, all right, stay with that, whatever it happens to be. But stick the mind onto something here in the present.
You know, even here at the school, we give people phone stipends because we have an expectation we call them 24/7. Is that a mistake?
It depends really upon the responsibilities and obligations of the faculty. Take another example. Let's say you're a brain surgeon. You should be on call 24/7 because there may be times where at 1 o'clock in the morning you need to come in and do an emergency surgery. That's perfectly reasonable. If you are the school's librarian, do you need to be on call 24/7? Probably not. So to make her be on call 24/7 might be a bit over the top. So the question is it unreasonable? Is perhaps not the right question to ask. Ask other questions. Under what circumstances would it be reasonable for a faculty member to be on call 24/7? Under what circumstances would it be unreasonable? And just generally describe those circumstances and then see if they fit the school. The other thing to remember is that there's always going to be pros and cons to anything that you do. What are the pros to having faculty members on call 24/7? Okay, you know what they are, those are the reasons you do it. What are the cons? What are the negative aspects of having someone on call 24/7? List those down. Weigh them up. Weigh those against the obligation and the needs of the faculty, and then you'll come up with an answer. But my question to you is, in asking that question, it seems to have come from this, what's the connection between those two?
Because of technologies, are we as business leaders creating more stress in the people that we're serving, our employees, because we can. We can be connected with them all the time. We send emails, in the middle of the night or whatever it is. What's our responsibility as citizen leaders in the school today? I mean, it's changed so rapidly.
Again, a surgeon may need to be woken up at 1 a.m. Very few teachers in high school need to be woken up at 1 a.m. So 24/7 might be completely unreasonable. At 10 o'clock at night, when the teacher goes to bed, phone goes off. So to say 24/7 when it's unreasonable to the person who's experiencing it, definitely going to be counterproductive. Having said that, we do sometimes see this tendency for us to blame technology for the enhanced stress levels. It's the wrong approach. We want more technology, we want more connectedness, we want more integration with the wonderful things that science has given us. The problem is that our intellectual development is not tracing the same path. As human beings, we should be able to be 24/7 connected to our mobile phones and other devices without any stress. But we don't. We don't have that capacity. And so we do have to go on a 2-day digital detox. The problem is not with the technology and the connection to the world wide web of knowledge. The problem is with our inability to manage the mind. So it's also an interesting point you bring up in terms of because we can. Because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Okay, if you can afford a Learjet, doesn't mean you should buy one. If you don't fly, if you never leave your home, because you can have 24/7 connectivity with your staff doesn't mean you should. Again, the only reason you would do something is if that policy is directly connected to an ideal. What are you trying to achieve with that? Does doing this, having 24/7 connectivity, achieve this goal? Yes, then that's a reason to implement it. What are the unintended consequences? A, B, C, D. Do these unintended consequences offset the benefit that we intended? Yes, get rid of it then. Or no, keep it. Or yes, but we can manage it by other methods or whatever.
Well, where this comes from, San Diego has the highest adolescent suicide rate in the state of California. Is it the parents' fault? Is it the school's fault? Where is it coming from? So, that first line you started with, you can't control things you don't understand. What is the intellectual experience we're trying to create here so we can understand, so that we can shape the world that we want?
The question of where it comes from is all that and more. Yes, it's coming from parents. Yes, it's coming from schools. Yes, it's coming from themselves, their peers, the media, the environment in general. The problem is that if we place all of our attention on fixing the environment, the problem is that 5 years from now, the environment will be different. Oh, fix it again. 5 years from now, it'll be different. Fix it again. You keep addressing the thing which is not the cause. If we can teach people to manage their minds effectively, then it doesn't matter how the environment changes, we're able to negotiate our way through that. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you neglect the environment. So we have to recognize that as human beings, we do have this weakness. In fact, this is something that you often see happening in terms of policy. We often put policy in place based upon the world that we would like to exist rather than the world that does exist. So having 24/7 connectivity, in a sense, you could say this is putting a policy in place in a world where people don't mind being at the beck and call of their workplace 24/7. Most people do mind being at the beck and call of their workplace 24/7. So that policy is based upon what you'd like to be rather than what is. So taking into account human weaknesses then you may make modifications to the environment to assuage the frustration and so on and so forth. But that's done as a temporary measure, like a crutch. You use a crutch while you're healing and strengthening the foot. Eventually you throw the crutch away because the foot's strong enough again. So you put things in the environment like a crutch to help support people, but primarily what we're trying to do is to get the intellect developed so that those crutches can be taken away. Or when they move into a new environment, say from high school to university, those crutches have disappeared overnight. So if they're not prepared for those crutches to be taken away, they're going to fall. So that's the emphasis, is on developing the inner personality. Okay, that's our 60 minutes. I'm happy to answer any other questions, but if people have cut-offs, please feel free to leave.
So I'm just like, I've read this book like 5 times.
Yeah.
And I've just been devouring this stuff, and without any kind of actual game plan, if you will. Is there a more direct kind of?
Yeah, there is. A couple of things. One is this book and The Fall of Human Intellect and a bunch of other books are part of a curriculum that is presented at the Vedanta Academy in India. So start with the first book in the series and move to the next. But don't just read it, study it. So you'd say you could read this book in the space of 2.5 hours, right? Total reading time. Study time would be maybe 10 times that to study it, or 20 times that. Going through slowly, rereading a paragraph 10 times, underlining all the nouns so you can define everything, underlining all the assertions so that you can check every assertion. Proper questioning and analysis in a systematic, logical sequence. That's the first thing. The Academy course that we study there has been presented as an online e-learning course, or 360 lectures or whatever it happens to be. All right? And so you can watch, listen, study, go through. The other thing is regular meetings like this, or other study groups that we conduct as well. The reason for that is opportunity to clarify your own doubts, to just check your own understanding. The other thing that's really important in terms of education in general, but I think specifically this sort of education, is the human to human in the same room. Being in the same room with other people who are also studying this has a buoyancy effect that you can't get on your own. Or just even something as simple as hearing another person's question that you hadn't thought of. Great question, I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, also that sort of emotional uplift that we get of just sort of studying and being around others who have a similar mindset. That's another important aspect. So we run regular weekly or bi-weekly study groups. So those are the main things: reading in order, studying in order, the e-learning, and attending any study groups that might be close to you.